Secasinkas. That means hello, friend, in Nisanan. Welcome to the good world.
1, 2, 3.
So come on into a place that is fine. I'll be your friend and you can be mine. The world is a stream of constant bullshit, but that doesn't mean there's not a whole lot of good shit. You start with the lean and we can make something different. Let's build a world that is good.
This is a show for adults. Hi friends, welcome to the good world. My name is Brother Seth. I am an ordained interfaith minister and a spiritual atheist. Different things. Welcome. I'm delighted to have you here. So the introduction, the cold open that I just did, is a greeting. It combines two words that I just learned in the Nisanan language. So something I've been thinking about. Last night, Susie and I went to the Sacramento Kings game, and it'll be, I post this tomorrow, so it will have been 2 days ago by the time this goes live. But it was Native American Heritage Night, and our area where we live, what is now called Sacramento, California, was historically and traditionally was a meeting place of a number of different indigenous tribes, and so there's an incredible richness of historical language use. And so the greeting that I just did, Sekasin, which means hello. I actually don't, it's very possible that grammatically the language is structured differently. I literally just looked up two words on a website that I'll link to. It's the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians. They have a number of useful language resources. So that was really cool to find. But Seekasin means hello, and Ks, I'm pronouncing these as best I can, means friend. You're my friend. You're here. Something I learned at the game, because they had sort of all kinds of, there was trivia, there were demonstrations. I met two really both very kind and very interesting people who were sort of near where our seats were. One, her name was Sky. I don't remember either of their last names because I don't remember their last names. But Sky was doing a demonstration of basket weaving, and she is from the Ione band of Miwok Indians. So that is both one tribe, and Miwok is sort of a language group. And then there was Jeremy, who was doing a demonstration of sinew work, which involves using animal sinew. The products that he was demonstrating used basically tendons from mule deer, and it's these incredibly strong fibers. It basically works in kind of a similar way to fiberglass. And so he was showing us a wooden bow, like a bow and arrow kind of bow, and it was reinforced with this sinew, and that makes it incredibly strong. So that was really cool to see. Jeremy is not from a Miwok tribe. He's from the mountain Maidu. Maidu is another language family. And so there was a fact that was put on the are they called jumbotrons? Growing up, we called it the jumbotron, whatever, the big screen above the basketball court, that what is now the state of California historically has been one of the most linguistically diverse places on the planet. And historically, there were 78 different native languages spoken just in this state. My last episode was about how amazing California is, and mostly I was just talking about the natural diversity, the biodiversity, the geological and topographical diversity, and I touched a little bit on the many immigrant communities that are here in Sacramento, which is also a really wonderful way to experience different cultural richness. Susie and I are going to, there's an event this weekend it is the Hmong New Year's Festival, and so we're going to go to that, and that should be a great way to get to know another culture. But this is really a meeting point of so many modern cultures, but it's also for a very, very long time been a meeting point of many, many native cultures that were here long before Europeans or Asians ever showed up here. And I was really struck by the idea that there were 78 different languages, and something that I have talked about maybe on here before, but certainly something that is true about me is that I love languages. I find them really fascinating. because they're all just sort of subtle variations of like, okay, people ended up in a certain place with a certain situation, and so they needed to develop a way to communicate about their situation, and so languages evolved in ways that reflected the context that people were in, and some of that is, the different words that people have for different things, and in some places you have lots of different words for different kinds of the classic thing is that the indigenous peoples of Alaska have some large number of words for snow, and they don't all mean the same thing, right? It's like, well, a snow that does this is different from a snow that does that. And if you're in a geographical context where you're dealing with a lot of snow, you're going to end up developing different words for different kinds of snow. Whereas if you live in a place that never gets snow, like, say, Sacramento, California, although if you go up to the mountains, there's plenty of snow. But if you're here, maybe you don't ever need to develop even a single word for snow. Or maybe you see it far away on the peaks and you're like, oh, that's the white stuff up on the peaks. But so this is one reason I find languages really fascinating. It is also the case, and I'm going to get the specifics of this probably a little wrong, but it is something to the effect of tonal languages, which I've talked about this a little before. So tonal languages are where in English you use tone, right? Like the sound of my voice is like changing tones. And you use different tones in English to convey emotion, to convey sort of other meanings that go along with the specific meanings of the words, right? I can say, like, if I say, I am happy, that conveys that I am happy. If I say, I am happy, like, you're probably going to pick up that sounds sarcastic because I'm saying it in a way that sounds sad, right? So we use tone in English to convey emotions and sort of other additional meanings, or questions, right? Are you having a good day? Goes up, that's a question sound. And in tonal languages, the tone is included in the meaning of the word. And I cannot speak any tonal languages, so I am not a good person, I'm not a great resource for examples of this. But I know that in Mandarin, the word ma, depending on the tone of how you pronounce it, and I'm not going to be able to recreate them because I don't know how to, but it's something like, if you say ma, that means something different from ma. And both of those mean something different from ma, right? In English, we would think of those as the same word, but that's three different words that I just made with three different tones. And tonal languages have evolved in I believe it's more tropical places. And there is a theory that it's basically because tones, like sounds, those are different tones. Those transmit better through, I believe it's humid air, than consonant sounds like t, t, and p, p. And if you're in a place that's really humid, then that stuff gets kind of mucked up in the air, but the tones can get through. And so people end up using tone to convey word meaning in a way that sort of subs in for a lot of consonant sounds. And I will say, just I have observed, not an expert in linguistics by any means. Though I did once have a college roommate who liked to call himself a linguist, which is almost the same thing as actually being a linguist. But I'm a language hobbyist. And I've noticed in my travels that in the languages of Southeast Asia, there seems to be a tendency to, like, what we would say as a final consonant on a word, it's more of a stop than an enunciated consonant. So I'll give you an example of this. And again, I don't know how to create the tones, so I'm going to say a Vietnamese word and I'm not going to be able to create the tone for it. But the Vietnamese word in English, we would say Tet. T-E-T, and that's the New Year holiday. And there was a very famous, if you're American, you've probably just heard this word with respect to the Tet Offensive, which was a major offensive action by the northern Vietnamese army during the Vietnam War. But Tet it's the New Year holiday, and native English speakers would say Tet, and my sense from talking to people when I was in Vietnam, my understanding is that if I try to be clearer about what I'm saying and say tet as opposed to tet, like they don't even notice that difference because it's meaningless to them, right? All of the meaning is conveyed in the tone, and there's a T at the start of the word, but at the end it's really more of it's just tet, and like you don't pronounce the T at the end, or like I learned a little bit of Indonesian, which is mostly a Malay language, like Malay sort of, but Indonesian and Malay have very, very heavy overlap. Like if you saw the word HAK as an English speaker, you might say hak, but in Indonesian you would just say hak, and right, it's just a stop. Anyway, these are different things that have happened with languages in different places, and they're kind of cool. And we're going to take a break here, because why not? And we'll be right back.
Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe.
Yes, friends, that 4-part harmony of our lovely Good World Barbershop Choir is a reminder to please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this with your friends, join my Patreon, follow me on the socials, although I haven't been posting as much on the socials other than the YouTube videos and the podcast. But send this to your friends. Comment. Leave a comment. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't like. Engage. Please help me feed the algorithm so I can keep doing this. Okay, so I was talking about languages and sort of how I find them really fascinating, because all around the world they have evolved in different ways. And something else that I have noticed in traveling to other places, and this is something that I think historically has been true here in the US, and really just within the last few centuries we have lost sight of it, is that wherever humans are, there is an enormous amount of linguistic diversity. And you see that anywhere, especially that there are any kind of physical barriers. Mountains especially are a big one, and waterways can also be a big one. Although I do remember learning something about, I don't remember if this was the Philippines or Indonesia. Frankly, it might be both. But often, both of these are countries with their archipelagos, right? They have huge amounts, many, many islands. And so often you'll have, 2 islands that are near each other, and you would think that their languages would be really different. And what you end up with is, when the coasts face each other, their languages are similar. And then if there's a mountain range on a single island, each side of the mountain will have a different language. And so I do remember Susie and I went to Indonesia on our honeymoon, and we went to the island of, it's called Flores. In some cases, it's also called, I believe it's West Nusa Tenggara. And it is if you're going to see Komodo dragons, it's where you go to see Komodo Island is right off the coast. So basically you take a boat and you go and you see Komodo dragons in their natural habitat, and it's crazy. And we did that. I'll put a picture up here, because they are, even seeing them in zoos cannot prepare you for how absolutely massive they are, because the ones in zoos in the US, at least the one I've seen most recently, and it's been a while, was at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. It's a female, and in Komodo dragons, the females they're pretty big. They're like 6 to 8 feet long, I want to say, and the males are like 12 feet long. They're just huge. They are huge creatures. And they're also, Komodo dragons they're dangerous. Like, their saliva is super, super toxic. It's full of like really gross bacteria. And so the way they hunt is they'll find like a deer or whatever, and they'll bite it. And they won't kill it with the bite initially, but they'll just follow it, because slowly but surely, because their saliva is so full of bacteria, the bite will become infected, and the deer will eventually get sepsis and it'll die, and then the Komodo dragon can eat it. And so literally it'll just bite a deer and then follow it for days, waiting for it to die of an infection. Anyway, So Susie and I went to the island of Komodo, but you get there from Flores is the colonial name. It was colonized by Portuguese, I believe, and which also ends up with an interesting history that's different from the rest of Indonesia because it's the only island that was colonized by the Portuguese, and so it's Catholic. Like the people are mostly Catholic as opposed to other places where, in most of the country, the people are majority Muslim. Bali is somewhat famously majority Hindu. Interesting country, lots of diversity just within that country. But so Flores is a very long, skinny island. If you are familiar with Long Island in New York, it's kind of like that, although I think it's bigger, but it's that same shape. Like it's just long and skinny. But there are huge mountains in the middle. And one of our guides, I remember talking to him, he was telling us he was from the west, which is over here, and his wife was from the northern part of the middle of the island. And there's a mountain range in between them. And as if you're flying like a bird, it's not very far. It's about 100 miles. And I was asking him, are the languages, because he was telling us like he grew up speaking one local language and his wife grew up speaking another, and then when they were in school the government started teaching everybody Bahasa Indonesian, because they had this huge country with enormous linguistic diversity, and so they taught people, okay, here's a common language that we can all speak. What I do appreciate about that, and this is the case in a lot of parts of the world, is people have their local language and they have the bigger language. We also, Susie and I encountered this in Vietnam, especially up in the hills where there are a lot of sort of smaller tribes. People will have local languages that literally change from one village to the next. Like you'll be in a village, you'll leave, you'll walk for 20 minutes, you'll arrive in a different village, and they will speak a completely different language, but the people from those two villages can speak Vietnamese with each other because that's the national language. And so our guide in Indonesia was telling us about, he grew up on this part of the island, his wife grew up on this other part of the island, he's over here, his wife's over here, and he and his wife both went to school after the government started teaching people Indonesian, but both of their parents did not. And so neither of their parents spoke Indonesian. They only spoke their local languages. And so I was asking him, thinking about like Portuguese and Spanish they're very similar languages. They're not exactly the same, but there's a lot of mutual intelligibility. And if you can speak Spanish, you can understand a fair amount of Portuguese, and vice versa. Especially written is often a little easier than hearing it. And so I was asking him, like, is it, are the languages kind of close enough? Because you're not from that far apart. And he'd say, oh no, I have no idea what they're saying. I just am unable to have a conversation with my in-laws. And his wife can't have a conversation with his parents. And, you get that in lots of places in the world, right? You have this linguistic diversity, and here in California, historically, you have enormous linguistic diversity. And out of the many, many things that colonialism has cost us in our modern life is that we have lost so much of that diversity. It's not gone, but it's really, really pushed to the margins. And so you don't have this thing, like there's a lot of value to the fact that all of these people in these remote tribes in Vietnam, all of them speak at least two languages, right? They all speak their local language and the national language. Many of them also speak English, particularly people who work in tourism, as you might expect, or they'll speak other languages. Plenty of people in Vietnam speak French because that's a holdover from the days of colonization also. But the impact that it has on your brain of learning new languages is like there are studies about how it enriches and deepens and shapes your brain in a way that it enables you to engage with more complexity and more abstract thought, because suddenly, literally, your world grows, right? Like your understanding of the world grows because suddenly you have new perspectives. And even just things like Something I think I've talked about before is that in English we have the phrase "you pay attention," right? And attention is something, it's something that you're paying. It costs you. Whereas in, I think it's German, you gift someone attention, and it's a thing you do from a place of love. And these are all things. This kind of thing is hiding just below the surface in any language. Like you're not realizing that unless you're exploring other languages and getting to know them. And so the number of ways that your linguistic experience, the languages that you speak, in my case, really just English. Like my Spanish is okay. My French is a little worse, but passable. Or can at least like get me through some stuff. And I can, if I recently was watching Lupin on Netflix, which is a French crime drama TV show. And I watch it with subtitles, but I can like track, I see the subtitles and I'm like, oh yeah, that word is that word and that word is that word. Like I still remember that from high school. And so my Spanish is pretty good. Puberty voice. I think I need a puberty voice graphic that I put up. I'll work on that next time. My Spanish is pretty good. My French is okay. My Italian is worse. I took it for a year in college. My Portuguese is much worse. I did like 6 months of Duolingo before I went to Brazil one time. And then if you take a number of steps down, my Indonesian is much, much worse. I tried to learn as much as I could before Susie and I went there for our honeymoon. I can still remember how to say satu dua empat lima. Satu dua empat lima. No, I'm missing one. Satu dua tiga empat lima. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Satu dua tiga empat lima. I don't remember numbers above that. And I remember how to say ini adalah istri saya, which means this is my wife, because I had just gotten married and I wanted to know how to say this is my wife. And I barely learned more Indonesian than that. I did manage to navigate one purchase at a street food stall, and I did it in very, very broken Indonesian. But so English is the only language that I'm even really close to fluent in. At my best, I was decently fluent in Spanish, but I'm pretty out of practice. And yeah, so for those of us who really think just in one language, like there are all of these assumptions baked into the language that we don't even think about because they're just baked into the language, right? And so this idea of paying attention, again, coming back to that example, is something where if you're not actively thinking about it, you don't notice that you consider attention to be like a drain on you. And if someone asks your attention, it's like, well, I guess I'm going to do you the favor of paying attention. Whereas in German, you also don't really think about it, but you think of your attention as a gift you can give other people. And that kind of thing occurs in every language in lots and lots of different ways. And so something that we lose through not having our own experience of linguistic diversity, our own individual, whether we're bilingual or trilingual, quadrilingual. They're people who speak many languages, right? And I believe it's more than half of the people on the planet speak more than one language fluently. Because, again, most places in the world are like this, where you have, sort of a native language and then a regional, a lingua franca, as the expression is, which is just like the language that you can use to communicate even if it's, I don't know, in the same way that two immigrant communities in the U.S. might speak to each other in English, even though, if you get a Chinese immigrant and a Mexican immigrant, like neither of their native languages are English, but they can speak it with each other, right? That's a lingua franca. And so in most of the world, people have their local language and a lingua franca, most people in the world. And colonialism has gotten rid of a lot of that in a lot of places, and particularly in, I don't actually just want to say in the U.S., but in the Americas. Also, I am pretty sure in Australia, though I have not been to Australia. I've spent a fair amount of time in South America and a little bit in Central America, and I have spent my entire life basically here in the United States. And so there are all of these historical indigenous languages that have been spoken all around the world that we don't that were intentionally erased in a lot of cases, right? Especially here in the US. Like natives were sent to boarding schools to be assimilated. They were made to cut their hair, which was an incredibly important thing of religious significance to them. It's almost the equivalent of forcing someone to like take a cross off their neck and throw it in the trash, right? Like hair is an incredibly, or in many indigenous American traditions, hair is a really important part of your being and is like a symbol of your growth and your wisdom. And so being forced to cut your hair and have a colonial haircut is a huge erasure of your culture. And even more than that, there was a significant effort made to just completely wipe out and erase indigenous languages and force people to speak English, because if people are speaking a language and you, the colonial ruler, don't understand that language, then that gives them an ability to organize and gives them some opportunity for power. And if your entire goal is to subjugate them, then you don't want that. And this loss of linguistic diversity is such a loss for us as people, because anytime you get a new or different language, you get people exploring different ways to be human. And if there is a single overarching message of this show, it is that all of the different ways that people have found to be human, and all of the different ways that people have not yet found to be human, are part of the tapestry of who we are as a species, are an important part of the tapestry of who we are as a species, and are valuable, are meaningful, and enrich our lives when we are given the opportunity to engage with them. And something that has happened because of colonialism is a lot of that has been stripped away from us. And that is a huge loss. Okay, so I'm interjecting here. This is Seth from slightly later. I was just editing and I realized a point that I did not make that I think is also an important part of this. So obviously when I talk about colonialism and colonization, we're thinking of European colonization of other continents, the Americas, Asia, Africa, and that is a big part of the story, absolutely. But when we're talking about linguistic diversity, you can actually see colonialism wasn't just a thing that went from Europe out to not Europe. It was also a thing that went from Europe to within Europe. So France used to be lots of different kingdoms and principalities and stuff. Spain, same thing. Portugal, same thing. All of these places, the modern countries, they're modern. They're pretty new in the long expanse of history. And so just using France as an example, we think of the French people in France speaking French, and they do, but a lot of them also have regional languages that have been just kind of basically shut down by the French government in the same way that the US government has historically shut down indigenous languages, and the Canadian government as well. And so again, keeping France as an example, there's like the Occitan language, which is southern France. There's Provençal, which is sort of south and slightly eastern France. There's Gascon, which is the west coast of France. There's in Spain, if you go south across the border, you have Catalan, which is its own language, and there are other languages in Spain. There's Aragonian, the language of Aragon. In between Spain and France are the Basque people, who have been struggling for their own independence for quite some time, who speak neither French nor Spanish, and have their own language. It's not related to anything else around it. And so when I talk about colonialism having destroyed all of this linguistic diversity, I'm not just talking about colonialism done by Europeans in places other than Europe. I'm talking about all around the world. There is a deep, rich history of local language, and there's plenty of overlap between some of those languages and other nearby languages, right? And Catalan and Spanish and French all have a fair amount in common, but they are different languages. Catalan is its own language. It's not a dialect of Spanish. It's its own language. And so far, I have really just been talking about France and Spain and Portugal and like that area, that is a small part of Europe, right? Germany has many historical languages within it. English of as a language evolved from the Angles and the Saxons. And the indigenous languages of the British Isles are like Irish and Scots and Cornish and Welsh. And those are all different languages, and the UK is not very big. And I haven't even really gotten into Central Europe or Eastern Europe or Russia. Like all of these places within Russia, there are a lot of different languages spoken locally. A very big country. A lot of people, most people, I imagine, also speak Russian. But my point is this: anywhere in the world, we may not automatically realize, and our system doesn't really teach us, just how much local language there is, just how much linguistic diversity there is everywhere. It makes us think that speaking only English or only French or only Italian or only Spanish, pick your only language. It makes us think that speaking only one language is the norm and that everything else is an aberration. And in fact, again, most people alive today speak more than one language. And historically, most people had a local language and a regional language that they used to communicate too. And so there is all of this culture out there that we could and are starting to be more exposed to. Like that is happening more, right? There are now more resources. For example, I was able to find a resource and learn how to greet people in Nisenan, which is an indigenous language from where I live. This is the case literally anywhere in the world. And so when I say colonialism has cost us this, I'm not just talking about the Americas. Literally everywhere, there is a long history of local language wherever you are sitting right now. And most likely, if you are watching this, you speak one colonial language, maybe two colonial languages. And it's not to say that there is anything wrong about those languages. It's just that they should not be the only things. And when they become the only things, we lose all of this cultural richness. And that is an important part of being human. Okay. Back to the episode I recorded 2 hours ago. Something that has been happening here in the Sacramento Valley where I live. So again, there are all of these different tribes that have lived here historically. There are Miwok-speaking peoples. There are Nisenan-speaking peoples. There are Maidu-speaking peoples. There are Patwin Wintun-speaking peoples. Those are off the top of my head. There are others. And so this historically was a crossroads of all of these different cultures. And we are now reaching a point where there is more of an opportunity happening for recognition of the native tribes in this area and the native peoples. And that is, it seems to be very much on the upswing. So, for example, the Wilton Rancheria, which is it's actually the only federally recognized tribe in Sacramento County, recently purchased the Sacramento Republic, who are our local soccer team. They're building a stadium, and so that's going to be a really big development, very close to downtown in the old rail yards from the old days of real big, Pacific Coast Railroad. And then also the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians purchased 2 very, very large plots of land downtown that they are planning to develop. And so this feels like an exciting time for Sacramento as a place where there is not just post-colonial cultural diversity, but there is a revival, hopefully, that is starting to happen of the pre-colonial cultural diversity as well, that has been really suppressed violently and horribly for hundreds of years at this point. But people survive. And that is also a thing that's true everywhere. Like anytime anyone has a strategy that's like, well, what if we just wipe out those people? It basically never happens. And even the stories historically where it's like, where we think of, oh, this culture has disappeared. Like, no, it's not. Those people are still there. The Babylonians are still in what is now Iraq. The Persians are very much still in what is now Iran. Right? All the people are still there. The Romans are still in Rome. Like, those peoples have survived in some way or another. I even remember when I went to Uruguay many years ago, Uruguay, the native tribe there, or at least the the predominant native tribe, is called the Charrua people. And it was presented to me that they had died out / been killed off. And in fact, that's not the case. There are lots of people of Charrua descent in Uruguay, and there are, like, often that heritage ends up getting mixed into others, and a lot of native people these days are mixed into all kinds of other groups. But that's also the entirety of human history, is different populations from different places meeting wherever they meet. That is the history of humanity, is just people survive and they intermingle, and it gives us an incredible amount of richness. It gives us diversity of thought that makes our lives better. Because at the other end of the spectrum, you get groupthink, which is where you get a small group of very powerful people in a room together with no outside perspective, and they all just convince each other of something. And that's how you ended up getting domino theory in the Vietnam War, which was disastrous. It's also how you ended up getting both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars in the US, which were disastrous. And it's also how you're currently getting insane amounts of money being dumped into AI in the form of a very circular investment, where a huge amount of US GDP growth right now is the same, like 10 companies investing in each other. And it's just like, well, this company gave that company $100 million, and that company gave this company $100 million, and that company gave the first company $100 million. And that's $300 million of economic activity, even though all of that money has just circulated back to where it was at the beginning. And that house of cards is our current economy here in the US. And that is a product of the kind of groupthink, the kind of isolation that happens when diverse thought is marginalized, and when you put just a few people who are convinced that they are smarter and better than everyone else, and they know better. When those people are only talking to each other, they make really, really bad decisions that end up screwing over the rest of us. And so that is also a big part of why I'm talking about linguistic and cultural diversity, is because, to me, again, a huge important part of this show is that there are lots of different ways to be human, and all of them are valuable. And when we discount them, when we treat people as disposable, when we because we don't understand someone, we decide that they don't contribute anything, we make ourselves worse off, and we end up actively hurting ourselves. That's what I gotta say. Honestly, that's my biggest takeaway here. And so it's really important to me, and it's really powerful, I think, if you get the chance to explore wherever you live, like, what are the languages that are historically from there? Who were the peoples that lived there? What can you learn about them? What can you learn about the people who are new to your neighborhood? Whether that's an individual family, which I would say, like, learn that by talking to them. Don't, like, go research your neighbors online, because that's creepy. Yeah, try to get to know other people. Try to expand your mind. Like, that is the best thing any of us can do at any given moment in time. We're going to end on that note. Well, thank you, friends, for your visit today. Now it's time we both go on our way. The world will still be insane tomorrow, but don't let that fill your heart with sorrow. You can thrive in a desert, just ask a saguaro. Please give to my Patreon. Capitalism is fun. Let's build a world that is good. This is a show for adults. Bye, friends. Thank you so much. Have a great holiday in whatever format you celebrate it. I'll see you next time.